Well, the National Trust is the guardian keeper of over 29,000 buildings in the UK, but also it's, I hope, at the forefront of trying to deal with the changing climate and its impact. Because what somebody has to remember is most of these buildings are hundreds, some over 1,000 years old. They've been built for a certain climate. As the climate is changing, a lot of these buildings are finding it difficult to adapt. One simple aspect is if you've got a building that's 300 or 400 years old that's used to a certain rainfall pattern, but the rainfall pattern is changing. We're getting heavier amounts of rain. The rain's overtopping and then running down the walls and being sucked into the buildings. The buildings are then suffering.
Okay, so we are now in Paris. So you would say that the Louvre and every French castle are threatened by climate change?
I think everything is going to... If the climate changes, the buildings, you have to remember that when they were built to a certain climate. They breathed in a certain way, as in the way that they got rid of moisture, the way that they heated up. They're having to adapt. The problem is people don't really know how to deal with old buildings. They think that you can deal with an old building as you do with a new one. You just strap some stuff on it and hope it does the best. If you get it wrong, you will lose some of the most important treasures that the country holds.
Sure. So how can we protect them? I mean, old buildings are considered as cold and hard to protect and expensive to make warm. Isn't it true?
Old buildings are difficult to understand, not difficult to treat. Once you understand how a building works, how it loses its heat, but also how we're using the building. Because in some circumstances, actually adapting the building by insulation, by better ventilation control, by better heating system, the buildings work well. In one example we've got is right on the north coast of Wales in the UK, and the building there is 200 years old, but it's actually being heated with the state-of-the-art marine source heat pump. We're pumping seawater out and gathering heat from it. So there is a solution, but it's not everything everywhere.
Okay, so globally speaking, what are your proposals in order to protect our old building and heritage?
I think the first thing that we've got to do is to understand what our buildings are doing first. Before we put modern technology on an old building, what do you want that old building to do? You have to remember that by 2050, when we need to deliver on our carbon targets, 80% of the buildings that will exist then have already been built. And therefore investment is heavy into passive house technology and modern buildings, but the amount of investment into research on the older buildings or the stock that will be there by 2050 isn't half as much, because the developers or the people who make money out of it want to always build more rather than doing bespoke solutions for the buildings that we already have.
Okay, so would you say, protecting building is definitely not the first concern of COP21 and government from all over the world. So do you think they even feel concerned by this issue?
A building isn't just a museum, it's a home. So the National Trust looks after 29,000 buildings. Only 300 of those buildings are actually what you'd call a museum, a palace, a castle. The other 28,000 people live in, they're actual homes, and therefore when you're tackling fuel poverty, when you're tackling the embodied energy that's already in these buildings, it's better looking after and adapting what you have rather than clearing away and building new. It doesn't make sense clearing out the old to build new, because the amount of carbon that's already embedded into these buildings has to be used first.
Okay, so what would you recommend about it?
Back to recognising that our old building stock, or most of the buildings that we already have, need better understanding. The investment is fine and everybody recognises that something needs to be done, but there needs to be more investment into research in order to share. Because we're not talking about palaces, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people's homes. And therefore, they need advice, they need to know what to do, because at the moment it's a very confusing landscape out there.
Okay. Did any ENDC take care of this building? Does any country speak about it in its contribution?
Some do. I think the problem that you've got, this is really down to almost a granular level, the building blocks of what needs doing. I think COP is more about the principles. We are going to do something, and therefore what we're hoping to propose as part of the National Trust, and we're doing a presentation tomorrow night with UNESCO, is look, these buildings are already here. Adaptation can happen, should happen in it, but I think COP is much bigger for now, which is a recognition that we should be doing something, and therefore what we're bringing to it is a how, not the what bit.
And do you feel confident about it in COP21? Do you expect something real about building conservation?
I think COP, the atmosphere in COP, I've been here 2 days now, it feels like everybody wants to do something. They've gone away from here's all the disaster, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad. There's a lack of that, and there's more of a we're going to do something about it. And that's what we're bringing in. It's not these buildings are under threat. We've always known that. But here's the approach that you could take if you want to adapt to the century that's to come.
Thank you very much.